It was just a joke. I didn't mean it seriously. I always tease like that. It's part of our banter. He knows I love him. Or so I thought. The annual company dinner was being held at the most exclusive restaurant in the city, a 5-star establishment that our CEO had reserved for the entire evening to celebrate our record-breaking quarterly performance. This wasn't just any work gathering. It was the kind of prestigious event where careers were made, promotions were discussed, and lasting impressions were formed about who belonged in the company's upper echelons. I'd been looking forward to this dinner for months, especially since Marcus had been the one who'd helped me get the referral that landed me this job 9 months earlier. His recommendation had carried significant weight with the hiring manager, and I'd spent nearly a year proving that his faith in me had been justified through hard work, innovative ideas, and the kind of dedication that had already earned me recognition from senior leadership. Marcus looked incredible that evening in his perfectly tailored charcoal suit, the one that made his shoulders look broad and his eyes seem even more intensely blue than usual. He'd been supportive and encouraging about the dinner all week, helping me choose the right outfit and giving me advice about which executives to focus on during networking conversations. The evening had been going perfectly until the wine started flowing more freely, and I found myself relaxing into the kind of confident, entertaining persona that had always served me well in social situations. My boss, Jennifer, had been including me in conversations with other department heads, and I could tell she was impressed with my insights and professional demeanor. That's when the conversation turned to relationships and dating, sparked by someone mentioning their recent anniversary celebration. The mood at our table was light and playful, with people sharing amusing stories about their partners and the quirks that made their relationship special. I was feeling confident and slightly tipsy, enjoying the attention and laughter that my stories were generating from my colleagues. Marcus was sitting beside me, occasionally squeezing my hand or adding his own observations to the conversation, seemingly relaxed and enjoying the evening as much as I was. That's when I made the comment that would destroy everything we'd built together. I told the table that my ex-boyfriend had needed 2 hands, but Marcus was more of a one-thumb wonder. The words came out easily, delivered with the same confident tone I'd been using all evening to entertain my coworkers and impress my boss. The reaction was immediate and mixed. Some people at the table laughed nervously, while others looked shocked by the intimate nature of what I'd just shared. My boss actually choked on her drink, coughing and reaching for her water glass, while staring at me with an expression of complete disbelief. But the most devastating reaction came from Marcus himself. His face went completely pale, all the color draining from his features as he processed what I'd just said about him in front of my entire professional network. The easy smile he'd been wearing throughout the evening disappeared entirely, replaced by something cold and distant that I'd never seen from him before. Without saying a word to me or acknowledging my attempt to catch his eye, Marcus stood up from the table with deliberate, controlled movements. He reached for his coat with the same calm precision, then delivered the line that would humiliate me more thoroughly than anything I'd said about him. He announced to the entire table that I should pack my things because I wouldn't be living in his apartment anymore. Then he dropped the key to our shared home onto the white tablecloth with a soft clink that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. The whole table watched in stunned silence as Marcus walked away from the dinner, leaving me sitting there with my mouth open and my face burning with embarrassment and shock. The silence that followed Marcus's departure lasted for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds, as everyone at the table processed what they'd just witnessed and tried to figure out how to respond to such an unprecedented situation. My boss was the first to speak, clearing her throat awkwardly and suggesting that perhaps we should all focus on enjoying the rest of our meal. But her voice carried a strain that hadn't been there earlier in the evening, and I could see her glancing at me with an expression that was difficult to read. The other executives and department heads began making polite conversation about safe topics like the food and the restaurant's ambiance, but their voices sounded forced and uncomfortable compared to the easy banter that had characterized the earlier part of the evening. I sat frozen in my chair, still holding my wine glass and trying to process what had just happened. The confident, entertaining version of myself that had been holding court just minutes earlier had completely disappeared, replaced by someone who felt small and exposed under the careful scrutiny of my professional colleagues. My colleague Sarah, who sat across from me, kept shooting me sympathetic glances while trying to maintain normal conversation with the people around her. But even her attempts at support felt awkward and strained, as if she wasn't sure whether consoling me would be appropriate in such a professional setting. The waiter approached our table to refill wine glasses and clear empty plates, but even he seemed to sense the tension and moved more quietly than usual, as if he was trying not to draw attention to himself or disturb whatever drama was unfolding. Among the dinner guests, I found myself mechanically participating in conversations that other people initiated, responding to direct questions with brief, polite answers, while my mind raced through everything that had led to this moment and what it might mean for both my relationship and my career. The worst part was realizing that everyone at the table now knew intimate details about my relationship with Marcus, information that was completely inappropriate for a professional setting, and that would probably affect how they viewed me as a colleague and potential leader within the company. My boss made several attempts to steer the conversation toward work-related topics, clearly trying to restore some sense of normalcy to the evening, but her efforts only highlighted how abnormal the situation had become. When dessert was served, I barely touched mine, too anxious and embarrassed to have any appetite for the elaborate chocolate creation that would normally have been the highlight of such an expensive meal. The other guests began making polite excuses to leave earlier than they might have otherwise, with people citing early morning meetings and family obligations as reasons to end the evening. But I could tell that the real reason was the uncomfortable atmosphere that had settled over our table after Marcus's dramatic exit. As people gathered their belongings and said their goodbyes, I received a mixture of sympathetic looks and carefully neutral expressions that made it clear everyone was still processing what they'd witnessed and forming opinions about my behavior and judgment. My boss's goodbye was particularly painful, delivered with professional politeness, but lacking the warmth and enthusiasm she'd shown earlier in the evening, when she'd been including me in important conversations and treating me like a rising star within the company. The drive home alone in my car gave me time to think about how Marcus and I had reached this point, and what my comment at the dinner might have revealed about patterns in our relationship that I'd been too self-absorbed to recognize while we were living them. Marcus and I had been together for 9 months, and from the outside, our relationship probably looked like the perfect partnership between two successful professionals who complemented each other beautifully. He was quiet, thoughtful, and incredibly generous with both his time and resources, while I brought energy, humor, and social confidence to our dynamic. He'd been the one who'd suggested I apply for the position at his company when I'd been struggling to find opportunities that matched my qualifications and ambitions. His recommendation had been crucial in getting me through the initial screening process, and he'd spent hours helping me prepare for interviews and understand the company culture. Throughout our relationship, Marcus had consistently supported my career goals and personal growth, celebrating my successes and offering comfort and practical advice during challenging periods. He'd been patient with my stress about work deadlines, understanding about the long hours I sometimes needed to put in, and proud of the recognition I'd earned from senior leadership. But looking back honestly at our 9 months together, I could see that I'd been taking his support and patience for granted while consistently crossing boundaries that he'd never explicitly asked me to respect. The comment I'd made at the company dinner hadn't been an isolated incident of poor judgment. It had been the latest example of a pattern where I regularly shared intimate details about our relationship in social settings, often in ways that portrayed Marcus in unflattering or embarrassing terms. At previous parties and gatherings, I'd made jokes about our sex life, compared his performance to previous partners, and shared private information that should have remained confidential between us. I'd thought these comments were harmless and entertaining, evidence of my confidence and lack of sexual shame rather than violations of his privacy and dignity. Marcus had always responded to these comments with forced smiles and polite laughter, never directly confronting me about how they made him feel, or asking me to stop sharing such personal information with other people. But now, I could see that his quiet acceptance hadn't been evidence of his comfort with my behavior. It had been him choosing to avoid conflict while quietly noting each incident and gradually reassessing his feelings about our relationship. The pattern extended beyond just sexual comments to include other ways I'd made Marcus the subject of entertainment for my friends and colleagues. I'd shared embarrassing stories about his childhood, made fun of his hobbies and interests, and generally treated him like material for amusing anecdotes rather than recognizing that these stories affected his reputation and self-esteem. I'd convinced myself that my willingness to joke about our relationship was evidence of how comfortable and secure we were together, proof that we could laugh about anything without it threatening our connection. But Marcus had probably been experiencing these jokes as a series of small betrayals, each one chipping away at his trust in me and his confidence that I respected him enough to protect his dignity in social situations. When I finally made it back to Marcus's apartment that night, I found him sitting at the kitchen table with 2 suitcases packed and positioned by the front door. He wasn't angry or emotional. He was calm and methodical, like someone who'd made a carefully considered decision and was now implementing it with precision. I immediately began trying to explain that my comment at the dinner had been a joke taken out of context, that I'd been nervous about impressing my boss and had made a stupid mistake that didn't reflect my actual feelings about him or our relationship. But Marcus cut me off before I could finish my explanation, telling me that the issue wasn't just what I'd said that evening, but what my willingness to say it revealed about my character and priorities. He explained that someone who truly loved and respected their partner wouldn't use intimate details about their relationship as entertainment for colleagues and strangers, regardless of how nervous or eager to impress they might be feeling. Marcus had apparently been keeping track of all the times I'd made him the subject of jokes and embarrassing stories, and he'd finally reached the conclusion that I was someone who would consistently prioritize getting laughs and social approval over protecting his feelings and reputation. When I tried to argue that he was overreacting to harmless jokes between couples, Marcus's response was devastating and final. He told me that if I thought comparing him unfavorably to my ex-boyfriend in front of my boss was harmless, then we had fundamentally different values about respect and loyalty in relationships. He'd already decided to end our relationship based on what had happened at the dinner, and nothing I could say was going to change his mind or convince him to give me another chance to prove that I could treat him with appropriate respect. The conversation escalated when I accused him of being overly sensitive and unable to handle the kind of playful banter that characterized modern relationships. I suggested that his reaction was evidence of insecurity and immaturity rather than legitimate concerns about my behavior. Marcus's response to my accusations was even more chilling than his initial decision to end our relationship. He told me that he'd rather be single than continue dating someone who thought humiliating him publicly was acceptable as long as it was framed as humor. He said that my comment at the dinner had confirmed what he'd been suspecting for months, that I was someone who would sacrifice his dignity for my own social advancement, and that this character flaw wasn't something that could be addressed through better communication or increased sensitivity. When I threatened to tell people that he was breaking up with me over an innocent joke, Marcus calmly informed me that he'd already spoken to several mutual friends about the pattern of behavior that had led to his decision, and that anyone who wanted details could contact him directly. His willingness to make our breakup and the reasons behind it public knowledge was the final blow that made me realize this wasn't a temporary fight that could be resolved through compromise and better understanding. Marcus had made a permanent decision about my character based on my behavior at the dinner and throughout our relationship, and he was prepared to defend that decision to anyone who questioned it. The following Monday at work brought a level of professional awkwardness and social isolation that I'd never experienced before, as it became clear that my comment at the company dinner had permanently altered how my colleagues viewed me and my judgment. My boss Jennifer's behavior toward me changed dramatically from the warm mentorship she'd been providing throughout my 9 months with the company. Our usual morning check-ins became brief, formal exchanges focused entirely on work tasks and deadlines, lacking any of the personal connection or career development discussions that had been helping me advance within the organization. During team meetings, Jennifer no longer sought out my input on strategic decisions or included me in the kind of high-level discussions that had been signaling her confidence in my potential for promotion. Instead, she treated me with professional politeness that felt like a demotion from the promising trajectory my career had been following. The other executives and department heads who'd witnessed Marcus's dramatic exit from the dinner began treating me with careful distance, as if they were unsure whether I was someone who could be trusted with confidential information or professional opportunities. Conversations that used to flow naturally became stilted and uncomfortable, with colleagues clearly avoiding any topics that might lead to personal revelations or inappropriate oversharing on my part. The networking opportunities and informal mentorship relationships that had been developing over the past months suddenly dried up, as senior leaders stopped including me in after-work gatherings and strategic planning sessions where important decisions were made. My colleague Sarah tried to offer support by explaining that people would eventually forget about what had happened at the dinner, but her attempts at reassurance only highlighted how significantly the incident had damaged my professional reputation. Even the administrative staff began treating me differently, with less warmth and casual friendliness than they'd shown before the dinner. It was clear that word about what had happened had spread throughout the entire office, making me a subject of gossip and speculation. The most devastating professional consequence came when I learned that Jennifer had quietly removed me from consideration for a promotion I'd been working toward for months, citing concerns about my judgment and professionalism that were clearly related to my behavior at the company dinner. But the social consequences extended far beyond my immediate workplace, as Marcus had apparently shared details about our breakup with mutual friends and acquaintances who began treating me with a mixture of judgment and curiosity. Friends who'd been supportive of our relationship started asking probing questions about what had really happened at the dinner, clearly having heard Marcus's version of events and wanting to understand my perspective. Some of these conversations revealed that Marcus had been more forthcoming about the patterns of behavior that had led to our breakup than I'd realized, sharing examples of my previous comments and jokes that painted a picture of someone who consistently disrespected their partner for social entertainment. The mutual friends who'd always included both Marcus and me in social gatherings began making it clear that they were maintaining their friendship with him while distancing themselves from me, suggesting that they viewed him as the wronged party in our relationship conflict. Within a week of the company dinner, I discovered that Marcus had been systematically removing me from every aspect of our shared life, with the same methodical precision he'd shown when packing his suitcases that first night. The apartment lease, which had been in his name, but which I'd been contributing to financially, was modified to remove any mention of me as a resident or authorized occupant. Marcus had contacted the landlord directly to ensure that I had no legal claim to continue living in the space we'd shared for months. Our shared gym membership was cancelled entirely rather than transferred to individual accounts, effectively cutting off my access to the fitness facilities we'd been using together throughout our relationship. The streaming service accounts, meal delivery subscriptions, and other shared services that had made our domestic life convenient and comfortable were all cancelled or transferred to his individual control. Most devastatingly, Marcus had contacted my boss Jennifer directly to provide what he described as context for his abrupt departure from the company dinner and our subsequent breakup. According to Jennifer, Marcus had explained that he couldn't continue in a relationship with someone who would mock him publicly to advance her own social and professional standing, and that he wanted my boss to understand that his recommendation of me for the job had been based on his assessment of my professional qualifications rather than any ongoing personal relationship. This conversation with Jennifer had apparently been professional and respectful, with Marcus taking responsibility for any awkwardness his departure from the dinner might have caused, while also making it clear that he no longer endorsed my character. or judgment in personal matters. Jennifer shared this information with me during what she described as a casual conversation, but her tone made it clear that Marcus's direct communication with her had influenced her own assessment of my professionalism and suitability for advancement within the company. The thoroughness of Marcus's approach to ending our relationship was both impressive and devastating, demonstrating that he'd given careful thought to every practical implication of our breakup and had taken steps to protect himself from any ongoing complications or consequences. His willingness to contact my boss directly showed that he wasn't concerned about potential professional repercussions for me, suggesting that he viewed my behavior at the dinner as serious enough to warrant such extreme measures. The fact that he'd been able to accomplish all of this within a week of our breakup revealed how quickly and decisively he could act when he'd made up his mind about something, and how little doubt he had about the correctness of his decision. Some mistakes reveal fundamental flaws in character that can't be explained away as momentary lapses in judgment, and some relationships can't survive the discovery that one partner views the other as entertainment rather than as someone deserving love and respect. Marcus had been right to recognize that I was someone who would consistently choose social advancement over loyalty and protection, and his public withdrawal from our relationship had been his way of ensuring that everyone understood exactly why he could no longer trust me with his heart or his reputation.